Good evening and welcome to the Rocky Springs Baptist Church Wednesday night Bible study by way of YouTube. We're so glad that you tuned in to listen to us this evening. Hope that the Lord speaks to you through the Spirit and the Word of God. Don't forget, we'll be at church Sunday morning at 10:30 for our physical worship service, so please don't forget that. Don't forget to pray. Many need our prayers, and so we ask that you pray for them. I have two great-grandsons that are in the hospital in Jackson, Mississippi. They were a little premature, and they're down there, and so I'd ask you to pray for them and their parents during this time. Men in our church need our prayers, and our nation, and our soldiers, and our policemen. So please keep all of them on your prayer list this evening. I want to bring you a very short message tonight, kind of a devotion, once again from the book of James. And James teaches us kind of how to live in this present world as God's children today. And so in James chapter 3 and verses 14 through 16, he makes this statement. But if you have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, glory not, and lie not against the truth. This wisdom descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, devilish. For where envying and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work. You know, I heard about a preacher who was coming to preach at this church, and when he got there in the church, about the time that he got up to begin his sermon, a man came in, had a dog, and he sat down on the pew, and the dog sat down on the aisle right by the man. And the preacher said, "Sir, I can't preach with a dog in here. I'd appreciate it if you'd take that dog outside and not have him in this church house. This is God's holy sanctuary." And so the man got up very graciously, went outside, tied the dog up, and come back and sat down. Well, after the service, a couple of fellows told the preacher, said, "You don't understand," said, "that man's wife and child were killed in an automobile accident, and that dog's his companion, and he keeps him with him all the time." And he said, I hope you didn't offend him, preacher." So the preacher got to thinking about it. Maybe he made a hasty decision. So he went out where the man was getting ready to leave, and he said, "Sir, I want to apologize to you. I didn't mean to offend you about your dog." The man said, "Oh, preacher, I wasn't offended." He said, "Just to be fair with you," he said, "I wouldn't want my dog to hear that awful sermon you preached." So sometimes you better be careful what you say. James here is dealing with problems that we sometimes face in our churches, you know. And James is saying that it begins on the inside. That's where the trouble always starts. It's not on the outside. It's on the inside. He said, in your hearts. Not that organ that pumps the blood, but it's that seat of emotion that we have that's within us. You know, we say we love you with all of our heart. And certainly I do love my wife, I love my children, and I do it with all of my heart. But that's not that organ that pumps the blood. That's a feeling of deep-seated emotion that we have within our bodies today. And you see, sometimes what happens in churches is things begin small, but they fester on the inside of somebody, and it creates many problems sometimes with our church. I'm glad to say that in our church we have, I don't know of any problems. If we do, you please call me or come see me and we'll talk about it, but we seem to be all in harmony and unity. But James is writing this, and so as we're studying the book of James, we have to look at what sometimes happens. You see, and what happens in many churches is it kind of something that festers on the inside for a long time. And what happens is when these things go unchecked, the unity of the body is destroyed. There's not that unity and harmony that needs to be in the house of God. And the joy of God's people is killed. They may be singing and they may try to put a smile on their face, but deep down they have no real joy. And to be fair with you, God gets neglected in all of this. You sometimes go up the road, and I can think of a place or two right here close in this area where there was once a very elegant home, and the whole family is out of the picture. The original owners have died, and their children have moved off, and nobody takes care of it. And bushes begin to grow, and then trees, and eventually that thing goes up till it's not any good because it got neglected. Sometimes I think we do that with God. We neglect God. We don't trim out everything that needs to be done and spruce up the things that needs to be spruced up and paint the things that need to be painted and clean the things that need to be cleaned. I was thinking the other day I had my pressure washer out, and I was cleaning some stuff with pressure washer. Of course, it has about 1,500 pounds of pressure shooting that water out. It just cleans it real quick. I think sometimes that's what we need in our lives, is for God to turn the pressure washer on, wash everything out. But God gets neglected when these things begin to happen. James talks about here. He talks about the MO, the modus operandi. That's the way of operating. Usually it's used of criminals. I'm not saying these people are criminals. That's not what I'm saying. But if you watch a crime show or you read crime things, you find that they look for the criminal's MO. They look for that incriminating evidence that ties one crime to another. This is the kind of MO that this person has that committed this crime. Maybe they slit a window in a certain way to burglarize, or they do something else. They rob a bank and they use the same technique, and that's their MO. Well, you see, James is saying that there's an MO of what happens when things begin to fester in your heart, and it begins to cause problems in our churches. He said the first thing is envy. Envy. And that's, a desire. And I'm not talking about just saying I'd love to have a car like that, or I'd love to have a house like that. It goes further than that. This is a deep-seated desire. It's something you can't get off your mind, to have what somebody else has. Matter of fact, there was a movie a few years ago, and the title of it was Envy. And it was about two men who were neighbors. They worked in the same place. And one of them had some kind of harebrained idea. And he invited his friend and his neighbor to get in on the idea with him. And he thought that was the craziest thing he ever heard of. But it really took off. Made the man a wealthy, successful individual. And this man got so envious, and he was just ingrained in him. Every time he saw this man, he was envious of what he done. And you see, that's what happens in a lot of people. They're just envious They have a deep-seated desire and resentment against somebody that has something. Dr. Harold Sightler was a great preacher, great man of God. Great big fellow, had a very booming, deep voice. He pastored the Tabernacle Baptist Church in Greensboro, North Carolina well, he founded a church, and he was the pastor until he got way up in age and couldn't pastor any longer. But Dr. Sightler, he was a big man. So he got to the point at the church, said, Dr. Sightler, you a big man, you drive around that little car. We're going to buy you a new car. So they went down and they bought him a Cadillac, Coupe de Ville, big old car. Dr. Sightler, man, he said, I could ride in comfort. And he had that big Cadillac. And the guy come up and told him, so the preacher told him, said, I'm going to tell you something right now, that Cadillac will ruin you. It'll mess you up. I said, well, Dr. Sightler, what'd you say? He said, I looked at him and I said, well, it didn't hurt my doctor none. But that man was just envious that a church had loved Dr. Sightler so much they went and bought him a comfortable automobile to ride in. That's envy, when you get to envying something, you see. But you know, in the 46 years I've been pastoring churches, I've never, and one of the few things I can say I ain't never had anybody come to me and confess to me that they're envious. And for me to pray that they won't be envious of their neighbor, or envious of their fellow church member, or envious of and have a desire to have something that is just eating them alive. Never had nobody confess to that. I can confess a lot of things, but not envy today. You know, some folks get envious about who's playing the piano. You know, who is directing the music, who's teaching a class. They just have something in them that they think they can do a better job. And they're so envious and they're filled with it. If they can start some kind of rumor, then they'll do it so they can, finally, maybe they can get that job. They can get that position. They're envious. It starts in the heart. And we should never let envy rule our lives. Don't let envy rule your life. Because it not only will it rule it, it'll eventually ruin it. Strife. You know, that's an angry, bitter disagreement. Angry, bitter disagreement. See, I don't always agree with certain things. I don't know. I'm not in our church. That's not what I'm talking about. But you know, I used to have a great friend, and Dr. Brother H.V. Brown. Loved him to death. He was probably one of my best friends in the whole world. And you know, I went to Mississippi State University. I'm a bulldog. I bleed maroon and white. And he is an Ole Miss rebel. We didn't agree, and we kidded a lot, but we never got angry and bitter with these disagreements. You see, we could disagree agreeably. think sometimes in our churches that's what we need to realize. You know, I mean, Brother Brown and I didn't always agree on every little bitty portion of Scripture. We'd have a, but we discuss it. You see, when you have a bitter disagreement about something, then there's something wrong. I'll tell you that right now. It's ruining churches. It's ruining families. I used to pastor a church and had a man in the church, and good man. He had two sisters and a brother. And his mother had already passed away, and when his daddy died, they were just hill folks from up in Alabama. Told me, he said, I went to the house the day after Daddy died. He said, Daddy didn't have nothing. He said, this an old unpainted house that he lived in, and some wore out overalls, and wore out shoes. He didn't have any money. But said the one thing that he had was a pocket watch. A real nice pocket watch. And he said, when I went in, said, my two sisters and my brother were out on the back porch, and they were arguing about who was going to get that pocket watch. And he said they were just getting plumb mad. And he said, can I take a watch a minute? They handed it to him. He said, I took that watch and I threw it hard as I could, as far up in the woods as I could, and then I walked up there and hit it with a tree. He said, now we ain't got nothing to argue about, we can all get along. But they were getting mad over a pocket watch. I mean, you don't have to get bitter and angry over something. I mean, I've seen them torn asunder, families and churches, friendships. They fall out about something and they don't want to speak to each other. I used to know a man and a lady that, brother and sister, and I did some work for both of them years ago. And one day I was out of pocket, and they sent another man to do the work. And he went to the sister's home and he did the work. And as he was going out and getting in his truck, she walked out with him. And about that time, her brother passed by. He didn't know nothing about the bad disagreement they had. And he said, well, there goes old so-and-so. And she said, yeah, that's my brother. And he said, well, he's a nice man. She said, I hope he has a wreck and dies and goes to hell before he gets home. That's a bitter, I mean, that's bitter strife. They disagreed about something, and she was so mad she wouldn't speak to her brother. It's bad to see that, isn't it? The first thing you need to do, the first sign that this happened, is to get down in the altar and pray to God. I found it's hard to be angry when you're talking to the Lord. You're talking to God, it's hard to be angry. And I'll tell you this much. It's my personal view. Is if I was to see a church that was getting on the outs with each other, I'd say, all right, folks, let's get down in the altar and pray and ask God what to do. And then we'll follow His direction, and we'll be all right. So we don't need to harbor it within. You see, we don't need to park that in a harbor somewhere. You got a harbor, that's where they park ships. They're not using right then. Most folks just park stuff in their life. It doesn't do any good, you see. Don't cover it up. That's what he says. Glory not and lie not against the truth. Don't cover it up. You know, a lot of people try to cover things up. I kind of like that Cheetos commercial where the guy said, this machine will detect who's been eating the Cheetos, and it turns on, and his wife and two children got Cheetos yellow on their face, and he looked down, there's a cat, and he said, when we get a cat? You can't cover it up. God knows all about it. Don't try to cover it up. Don't come to church and put on a fake smile. Admit it. Get in the altar and pray. Ask God to direct and guide, and He'll take care of it. And then he says the source. This wisdom descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, and devilish. Earthly. Earthly. You see, that's wrong wisdom. It's man contrived. It's what I think. It's what's best for me. I pastored a church many years ago. One person got mad because we changed the times of the service. There was a practical reason why we did it. You know, and like I told him, I said, I can't give you a chapter and verse of anywhere in the Bible that we're supposed to have service at a certain time, but I said the reason we changed this was very practical. We got a lot of older people, and then they can't see to drive at night. I don't know what he's talking about. I'm there. I told my wife the other night I had to go somewhere, and I said I don't need to be driving after dark. You get where can't see, and I said I'm having this service so they can get home before dark. That's a practical reason for it. And I would think that you could understand that. Well, I need to do it this way. And I said, well, I understand that. But it's not what is best for just one person. I have to think about all the people in the church. Not earthly wisdom, not what's best for you, not what you think, but it's what does the Lord say. He gives us some wisdom. Sensual. That's the pursuit of pleasure, gratification of the flesh. It's unspiritual. Don't preach to me. We live in an age when people don't want to come to church and be preached. They don't want to hear the Word of God. Paul said the time will come. That time will come when they'll not endure sound doctrine, but heed to themselves teachers having itching ears. And he said, Timothy, what you do is just preach the Word. Be instant in season and out of season. When they like it and when they don't like it. But you see, we live in an age when people don't want to be preached to, so they'll go to a church where they got a motivational preacher. He'll tell them how to be a success in life, how to be all the things that they want to hear. You see, they get motivational sermons. You know, when I played football, coach used to give us some motivational. Some of the motivations he told us, I sure can't tell you in a church service. I can't tell you, period, to be honest with you, because he'd get motivated. I remember we used to have this guy named Bob Nees went on to play linebacker in Southern California, I believe it was. And he was meaner than a junkyard dog. And one time at halftime, we weren't winning but about 1 point. Come on, boy, he was mad. We was fixing to get ready to go back out for the second half. He come over where Need was sitting, and he said, Need, I'm going to tell you one time. Tell you this one time. You better get ferocious the second half. You get ferocious! And he started out the door, and he turned around and said, Neve, do you understand what I'm telling you? Get ferocious! Yes, Coach. So we're going back out on the field, and Neve looks at me and said, hey, what number is this ferocious I'm supposed to get? He done motivated them to get him. He just didn't know his number. But I'm not here to motivate you. I'm here to tell you what God says in His Word. And that's the best thing you can find if you are motivated by the Word of God. Devilish. That comes from Satan. You see, Satan wants to start a fight and then stand back and laugh. Now, when we were kids, we used to try to get two folks to fight. We do crazy things. We get them in trouble. You know, we'd reach over the guy in front of us and pull somebody's hair so they think it's a guy behind them. That's kids. And we'd laugh when they got mad at each other. That's what Satan does. He'll start to fight and then stand back and laugh. And see, that's where it comes from. That's the source, he says. It's because it's ungodly wisdom. And then he says, the result. What's the result? He says, for where envying and strife is, there is confusion in every evil work. Confusion. That's a lack of understanding. That means you don't understand what you're doing. I think people sometimes don't really understand what they're doing. You know, they'll start something and ruin somebody's reputation. That's sad, isn't it? Ruin somebody's reputation. They'll want to start some kind of rumor, some kind of gossip. Dr. Walter Burrow was a great preacher, and I learned so much from Dr. Burrow. And he and I were talking one time. We were talking about this kind of thing, and he said, you know, when people come to me and say, preacher, I got to tell you this. I don't want to, but I got to. He said, I reach in my desk drawer and I get out a notebook and I lay the notebook and a pen on my desk and I say, no, I don't want you to tell it to me. I want you to write it down and sign it. Well, I don't want to do that. Well, he said, don't tell it to me then. He said that eliminated most of my problems with that. You don't want to ruin somebody's reputation by starting some kind of rumor, do you? Ruin the testimony of the church. Well, you don't go to that church, then people fight all the time. They do this and they do that. And the preacher does this, the preacher doesn't do that. I used to have I still have a friend that pastored a church, and he is wasn't quite as tactful as I am. And he was at a wake, a funeral. They were having a visitation at a funeral home. And I've been to that funeral home, and they didn't have had a little curtain that separated one room from another. Didn't have a door, just a curtain that was hanging up there. And he's standing on one side of the curtain, and there was some lady on the other side telling what all was going on at the church he pastored. I mean, she was just letting it go. So he stepped around the curtain and he said, "Ma'am, I want to tell you something right now. I pastor that church, and ain't a thing you're saying the truth. And you need to tell these folks that they ain't none of it the truth. I'm telling them right now that you're lying about it." I said, "What happened?" He said, "She got so mad and said she stumped out of that funeral home and said I couldn't stand it any longer. I'm going to earn my testimony at my church by telling some kind of lie." And I said, "Well, the bad thing about it is she got it from somebody." He said, "Yeah, that's true." They don't really realize and understand they're doing Satan's work. All Satan wants to do is get somebody disgruntled and upset the church and cause problems. And he says, every evil work to cause trouble, and it makes trouble easy to get into. You know, I have my garden, a raccoon just got where they're getting in it, they're eating stuff. And got where they're coming up on my patio and eating my cat food. So I thought, well, I got me a trap. And I put that trap out and got me some marshmallows and put them in. They walked right into that trap, and then I had them. That's kind of what Satan's doing. He's putting that trap out with them marshmallows. Oh, they smell good and look good. When it's all done, it gets them in trouble. I want to tell you this evening, we don't need to be envy and jealousy in our churches. We need to ask the Lord to guide us and direct us. I want to say to you this evening, I thank God. I really do. Every day, I want the Lord to know that I appreciate Rocky Springs Baptist Church. I love those people and they love me. And we're not having all of this mess because we love each other. And I found out if you'll love each other and get direction from God, everything's going to work out okay. May God bless you, is our prayer.